228. The Dream of Reason. Chalcedon Position Paper, number 13, June 1980. Western Europe, since the beginning of the Enlightenment, has been given to one cultural fad after another. For example, the deists, with their myth of a natural religion common to all men and humanistic in nature, saw old China as the actual embodiment of such a faith. The result was a long-standing delight in things Chinese for reasons unrelated to the actual life of China. One of the most enduring and curious of these cultural fads was the interest and delight in things Turkish. Even Turkish furniture became very popular for a time, however great the discomfort. We have a relic of this fad in the continuing use of the term Ottoman for a type of backless chair or sofa. Historians also have been a part of the adulation very often. The Turkish armies were inferior to Western ones, and when strong resistance was made, hastily assembled and poorly equipped armies in the 15th century under Hunyadi Skanderbeg and Stephen of Moldavia defeated major Turkish armies. Usually, the European forces were divided. Some were ready to see the Turks defeat their enemies, and others were indifferent. The Turks usually overwhelmed their enemies with dramatically larger forces and a prodigal use of men. The Turks could usually count on most Europeans to be their friends. The father of Abdul Hamid II, the Damned, once ordered his son to kiss the hand of an elderly Christian visitor. When the young boy refused, something he found absolutely revolting, his father angrily declared, "Do you know who this gentleman is? It is the English ambassador, the best friend of my house and my country, and the English, although not belonging to our faith, are our most faithful allies." According to Abdul Hamid, upon this, I reverently kissed the old gentleman's hand. It was the Büyük Elçi, Lord Stratford Canning. The reason for the English position was power politics, which made them not pro-Turkish, but pro-English, as Abdul Hamid later found out. All the same, there was a cultural predisposition to work with the Turks. Western romantics had long idealized the Turks, and musicians loved to title various pseudo-Oriental compositions as Turkish marches and the like. Marx, too, shared in this favourable view of the Turks. Nathaniel Whale points out, Marx's comments concerning the Christian peoples of the Balkans were invariably harsh, contemptuous, caustic and unkind. But when he came to the Turks, he viewed them with a benevolent eye. When, that is, he wasn't including them as subjects of Oriental despotism. N. Whale, Karl Marx, Racist, page 128. Since 1918, because of the Armenian massacres, the old Turkish order is not as openly idealized, or else its last days are seen as a decline. This is done despite the fact that the Young Turks and Kemal Atatürk were more bloody by far than Abdul Hamid II. Why is there so much dishonest history with respect to the Turk? Why is the old Turkey seen through rose-coloured historical glasses, despite the fact that its long history had been a vicious one? A further question is necessary. Why did some late 19th and even a few early 20th century liberals view Abdul Hamid II as a great liberal? An example of a very kindly view can be found in the 2-volume memoirs of Arminius Vamberi, Professor of Oriental Languages in the University of Budapest. The Story of My Struggles, 1904. By 1904, the Sultan had come to dislike Western liberals and to regard himself as more enlightened than they. Vamberi gave a portrait of an unfortunate and suffering monarch. Indeed, the man had deserved a better fate, He is not nearly such a profligate as he is represented to be. He is more fit than many of his predecessors. He wants to benefit his land, but the means he has used were bound to have a contrary effect. I received from Sultan Abdul Hamid many tokens of his favour and kindness. I owe him an everlasting debt of gratitude. It grieves me here, where I am speaking of my personal relations with him, to have to express opinions which may be displeasing to him. Volume 2, pages 389 to 390. However, for the truly great love of Turkey, we need to turn to the earliest regimes to find the reason for Turkophilia. In 1952, a Harvard scholar made observations on Muhammad II, the conqueror, on May 29th, 1453, of Byzantium and Constantinople, which give us the key. As a result of the innovations introduced by Muhammad II, the structure of the Ottoman state almost conformed to Plato's ideal republic. Myron P. Gilmore, The World of Humanism, 1453 to 1517, 1952, 1962, page 7. In old Turkey, we see our futures as some would have it. A rigid educational system was set up to produce a class of military and administrative guardians to run the state. The Sultan, or philosopher king, was at the top. He himself, however, was expendable. To prevent wars of succession, brothers and relatives of the succeeding ruler were killed off, or else held in prison in reserve, if the reigning philosopher king should prove incompetent. The incompetent ruler was then executed and replaced. To provide for the guardians, Turkish and Christian children were taken. The Christian children were taken at an early age, brought up as Mohammedans, and trained for the Turkish state. A regular levy of children was the required tribute of the subject Christian peoples every 5 years. Most of the tribute boys were trained for military purposes. These were the famous Janissaries, the main and core group of the Turkish army. The Janissaries were kept separate from other peoples and lived for one purpose, the service of the Turkish state. They were under the very strictest of discipline and were brought up to regard themselves as an elite corps. Their prestige was so great that by 1600, Turks were bribing their way into the Janissaries. In the 17th century, membership became hereditary, and the Janissaries declined into an unruly group. In 1826, they were dissolved by a standard Turkish practice: total massacre. The ruling class and bureaucracy were similarly formed. A palace school was created to train superior children for the service of the state. These children, again, were from subject peoples and had been forcibly taken from their parents at an early age. Native Turks, or Osmanlis, had no more part in their civil government than did subject Christians, although, as Muslims, the Turks had a favoured place before the law. The free Muslim families provided the recruits for the learned classes: scholars, priests, teachers, and jurisconsults. The life of the Turkish state was everything. The life of the subject peoples was as fuel for the state. The lives of Turks were not more highly regarded on the whole, and even the life of the Sultan was expendable by execution if he were an impediment. The Sultan could be as abominable personally as he chose, but he could not be a detriment to the empire without risking execution. Now we come to the heart of the matter. The Turkish Empire was constructed to be a rational order, on the order of Plato's so-called republic. Its rule was to be the rule of reason, and all peoples, from sultans to subjects, were to be put in their place in terms of a governing order. Even at the top, the dreaded execution by strangulation with a bowstring was accepted as a horrible but necessary resolution of problems. The ruled and the rulers were alike subservient to the state. Abdul Hamid II saw himself as an enlightened and rational ruler. The rational solution to problems was to eliminate the problem. Hence the systematic massacre and deportation of Armenians begun under him and completed by his successors. When Abdul Hamid was deposed, he expected to be executed. It was the logical solution. His execution did not occur because his successors recognized that too drastic a break at that point was unwise. The Platonic and Turkish ideal of a rational state has long been a dream of Western man. The French Revolution was a classic example of it. The revolutionaries debated as to what would be an ideal population for France, and then began to exterminate people to reduce France to the desired status. Unwanted peoples and classes were similarly executed. The Russian Revolution gives us the same ideal. From top to bottom, men are expendable at the altar of the ideal order. Classes are liquidated. Christianity is made the target of obliteration, and mass murders made a policy of state. A number of writers have given us an account of this dream of order, notably of late. Alexander I. Solzhenitsyn in the 3 volumes of The Gulag Archipelago, and in the essays edited by him on From Under the Rubble. Much earlier, Dostoevsky had depicted the same dream or nightmare in The Possessed. All things are to be destroyed, to make way for the rational and planned society. This same goal is very much with us. It is basic to the thinking of virtually every modern state. For this reason, the modern state is at total war with its peoples. They are its real enemies. They must be remade and, if they refuse, destroyed in one way or another, economically, if not physically. The means to the goal are twofold. The older version, as in the Soviet Union and Red China, holds to total terror as the main instrument in attaining the dream of the golden age of reason. The more, quotes, advanced, end quote, humanists of the West have an improved version of the dream, and the classic demonstration model of this new order is Sweden. The Swedish model is in force virtually everywhere in the non-Marxist world. Instead of total terror, this new model relies on the control of education, economics and technology. The great study of this new model is Roland Huntford's The New Totalitarians, 1971. Sweden's planners regard the Russian effort as a failure. Page 85. Huntford noted, "It is probably correct to say that Sweden has been de-Christianized more efficiently than any other country. Russia not excepted." Page 219. In this dream, efficiency requires that the slaves of the philosopher kings be educated to love their slavery and to regard it as freedom. George Orwell, in 1984, saw this as a goal of the new order. Man must become a happy cog in the machinery of the state, and reason, with its tools of technology, must rule over all men. Solzhenitsyn in Gulag, Volume 3, pages 522 and 525, calls attention to what has become of law in the Soviet Union. The law has ceased to be a transcendent standard of justice. It has been made a tool of state policy. Hence, he declares, there is no law. In Sweden, this charge is openly set forth as an advantage. Carl Lidbom, formerly a judge of appeal, a cabinet minister, and a social democrat theoretician, has said, "The purpose of the law is to realize official policy. It is one of the instruments of changing society." A legal official told Huntford, "It seems natural to me that the law is there to put the intentions of the bureaucracy into practice." Huntford, page 122. If this sounds familiar to Americans, Canadians and others, it is with good reason so. It is all a part of the same rationalistic dream of a scientifically planned order by philosopher kings. These philosophers now have added science and behaviorism to their repertoire. They have moved from a rigidly planned to an existentially planning order. But their goal is the same. The methodology has been refined. Instead of a regular 5-year draft of a limited number of boys for the Genazaries and the bureaucracy, we now have an annual call-up of all 5-year-old boys and girls for the state school system and its humanistic indoctrination. Military service for all is in the offing. All this is done in the name of the public welfare and as a manifestation of the general benevolence of the state. Christian social deviants who insist on educating their own children in Christian schools are made the targets of civil and criminal charges. The state being the rational and the good order by presupposition, the, quote, great community, end quote. The church, Christian school and Christian family become the obstructionist, evil, and irrational elements in society. We have now forgotten what a radical and revolutionary step the French Revolution made in recruiting by law all its citizens for its armed forces as its Genazaries. Justice has now become not the righteousness and law of God, but the law and interests of the modern and humanistic state. As Huntford said of the Swedish judiciary, justice to them means upholding the interests of the state, not primarily guaranteeing fair play to the citizen. Page 123. This is increasingly true of every modern state. The triumph of Plato and Turkey is everywhere near. This course of events should not surprise us. When men despise God's law and its requirements of very severely limited civil and human powers, they will create their own dreams of order. If we deny God's law, we will choose man's law. If we deny God's predestination or plan, we will substitute a man-made plan or decree of predestination. The dream of reason, a nightmare reality, will be with us as long as we deny God's law and governments. The words of Joshua still stand. Choose you this day whom ye will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Joshua chapter 24, verse 15.